episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And sometimes they include legendary FBI agents who we will introduce in a moment. But there is so much news coming out about the quote-unquote New York City assassin. Luigi Mangione is his name. He's alleged to be the person responsible for this crime. Obviously, we've got to let the legal system play out, and we'll ask Lexie about that in a moment. Just a couple of quick things. Some of this has been out. Some of it is brand new, but I've got all the brand new stuff. Apparently, he cut off all ties with his family 6 months ago. I believe it was November 18th, if I have the date right, that his mother files a missing persons report. They were apparently actively searching, and then there is a ton of new stuff to get to. Before we do that, let me introduce the esteemed panel here. Agent Gregg McCrary, he entered duty as a special agent with the FBI December 1st, 1969. So he also got to see people land on the moon, which is pretty cool. He's been associated with the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, the NCAVC, since its inception back in 85. He's provided expert witness testimony in homicide and R trials, SA trials in North America and Europe. He's authored many books, including The Unknown Darkness, Profiling the Predators Among Us. He wrote that notably with Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who has studied BTK and now infamously has reportedly taught the University of Idaho suspected killer, Brian Kohberger. Next up, Dr. Debbie Goodman. She is at St. Thomas University, a criminologist, a published author, obviously an educator, and a former TV show host. And I love this last one, Lexie Rigdon, from the great state of New Jersey, I believe. She is a practicing attorney. She does family and criminal defense work. She enjoyed the show. She was a member of STS Nation and reached out. And I said, yeah, let's do it. I love STS Nation. I always say best guest, better community. And if we could combine the two, even better. So, Gregg, I'm going to start with you because you're obviously both a profiler in a lot of regards, but also an investigator. The big news, fingerprint match. Fingerprint match here. Police now saying that Luigi Mangione's fingerprints match the water bottle in this Kind bar that he was eating, a protein bar, which was found at the scene of the crime. And the gun found on him also matching the shell casings. The commissioner here said, we were able to match that gun to the 3 shell casings that we found in Midtown at the scene of the homicide. We were also able to, at our crime lab, to match the person of interest fingerprints, that would be Luigi Mangione, with fingerprints that we found on both the water bottle and the Kind bar found near the scene of the homicide in Midtown Manhattan. Gregg, is it game over for this suspect legally now?
Yes, I would not want to be the defense attorney, but I may let Lexie talk. We can talk about that as we get into it. But yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, the lock is in, and he's carrying the gun. Keep in mind, he's got the gun with him. That is the murder weapon. And then physically, you can put him at the scene, with the fingerprints from those items. And all that's left is some DNA evidence. It'll probably come in, at some point. And then if you look at all the other kind of circumstantial evidence, what's been called the manifesto, and now the notebook and the writings, and it's just the totality of the circumstances, the photos of him, the video, all of that. I mean, it's he's in a jam. I think for sure.
Yeah, and one more for you, Gregg, from MJ. I'm going to try to include, of course, as many questions as possible from STS Nation. And there's so much stuff. I could do 4 hours on this, but we're going to keep the guests probably be the fastest 90 minutes of your life today. Gregg, how did they do the ballistics that fast? How does that happen?
With the shell casings, and they're not talking about the bullets, the projectiles, they're talking about the casings, and they fire the weapon and then compare the known shell casings, and talking specifically about the extractor marks and the firing pin impressions. Those are unique tool marks. Every weapon is going to be different. The firing pin impression, the extractor marks are going to be different in each individual weapon. So then they compare the known shell casings fired from that weapon with the ones recovered at the scene, and they match those up microscopically. And it's like fingerprints to a degree, only these are mechanical tool marks. So that'll be what it is: firing pin impressions, extractor marks on the shell casing. It's done very quickly.
And I'm going to remind everybody about this again, a doubleheader. We made a commitment to cover breaking news. Maybe we bit off more than we could chew. But on top of this, at 7 o'clock, there are 3 infamous brothers here in the Miami area, but they are very well known. The Alexander brothers, 3 exceptionally good looking, according to my mom and wife, but also obviously twisted and deviant guys, because they were just arrested on major sex assault and sex trafficking charges that we're going to cover at 7. Another fascinating case, and another question where you ask also 3 guys of incredible privilege to match with this guy. What is going on in the world is the bigger question. How about that? Dr. Debbie Goodman, now you're in Miami, you know about this. What is going on? I mean, I know the vast majority of people are good, but we're seeing these headlines the last 2 days. These people of immense privilege. The Alexander brothers' father founded Kent Security. I'm sure you've seen it at some point. It's one of the largest private security firms in the world. And then these guys go on to become real estate, moguls. What's going on here, Dr. Goodman, with them and Mangione?
Certainly. Well, good evening, Joel, Gregg, Lexie, and thank you, of course, as always, to Steve. When we look at the case upon us, and we'll stay first with Luigi Mangione, as a criminologist, I'm asked routinely to come up with the answer to a why, and I try to create theories that I think align with potentially what the alleged shooter's motivation is. So I do have a theory on this, Joel, and I call it WAR, W-A-R, warranted anger and revenge. So I think with Luigi Mangione, he feels and felt warranted in his behavior. And his ideology, clearly based on what we know thus far, and a lot more to come, but is very anti either the healthcare industry or those in high regard with salaries that he may question, and his language, people who profit. So for me, I feel that he feels very justified in this type of conduct. And clearly, the conduct has to also stem from extreme anger. So, what exactly precipitated him doing this atrocity? I mean, it's so sad and so shocking, because we realize here that 2 families have been destroyed, to include his own grieving family as well as the Thompson family, and leaving behind, of course, the wife and the children. So extreme anger. And then ultimately, Joel, regardless of what type of killer we're analyzing, and again, we've all analyzed many, to include, those who commit a singular homicide, double, triple, quadruple, alleged co-burger, school-based violence, workplace violence, family violence. People who kill, in many instances, are doing so out of revenge. So for me, this case is based on war. He felt warranted. He was extremely angry, and ultimately sought revenge for ideology that he strongly believes in.
Really well said. And I have not heard the acronym WAR before, so that's interesting.
Well, I just created it.
Oh.
I coined it and created it.
Well,
and I'm saying it for the first time on your program, by the way.
There you go. Criminal profiling moment right here in history. So Lexie, to you, this is obviously your domain, the legal side of this. Yesterday, Tom Dickey, who no one knew who he was till yesterday. He's the attorney representing Luigi out of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He said, and I don't know how he did it with a straight face, there's no evidence against my client here. When they found 4 IDs, one is said to be the New Jersey ID he used to check in the hostel, not to mention a gun that happened to have a suppressor, not to mention a manifesto that happened to be handwritten where they can do handwriting analysis, not to mention a notebook. Well, today, adding on to this pile of this Mount Everest of evidence, a person walking their dog in Central Park, they find a Ziploc bag filled with bullets, and they believe it is tied to this crime that Luigi Mangione is said to have committed. The dog walker said that they're strolling. They were strolling near East 81st and 85th when they saw the bag in the bushes. By the way, the gun is at the NYPD crime lab. But Lexie, to you, I mean, I understand fully you have a job to do, but for this defense attorney to go out and say there's no evidence, I mean, he's living on Mars. I had criminal defense attorney Tim Jansen on, who said he never should have said that. He should have said something along the lines of, you know, I'm going to fight hard for my client. My client is innocent of all charges, but not to say that there's no evidence when there is a mountain of evidence. What do you say?
Well, I could be wrong about this. I'm sure someone will correct me, but I believe the words used was, I haven't seen any evidence that he's guilty or something along those lines. And I mean, that in and of itself is probably true because he hasn't been provided with any discovery. So if that might literally be true. However, for everyone else listening to that, it sounds like he's essentially saying that there's no evidence that he actually did this. And, you know, unfortunately for Luigi and his lawyer, which this would be a really hard case to take on, there is a mountain of evidence, and there's a mountain of evidence already. You know, Tom Dickey is probably in a bad spot right now. It's really hard when you have a client who they're dead to rights in terms of the evidence. And that certainly seems like what it is. But in fairness to him, he probably hasn't seen some of the reports or maybe gotten anything other than what's been in the news report and what might be in affidavits and people saying there's probable cause for this, probable cause for that. But he's really in an unenviable position as his lawyer with everything that's come out.
Well said. Here's a comment that is not surprising from Like Necho. Joel, when are you going to do the right thing and report on the crimes United Healthcare? Honestly, probably not going to do it because I don't study the healthcare industry. Here we've got an executive who was shot and killed because he held a position. Killing people is not the right way to go about it. It was obviously a very smart guy who could have used that brain power in different ways. With that said, do I think there's major problems with the American healthcare system? 100% yes. I get some of the animus, some of the anger, but to support a killer, which we're going to get into because there's a defense fund out there for him right now, it just blows my mind the amount of support that this is getting. Gregg McCrary, back to you. He, according to authorities and what they found in his notebook here, he considered bombing as an option. And he said he decided against it as a large explosion could, quote unquote, kill innocents. This is actually coming from a law enforcement source, speaking to the media. But this was in his notebook. What do you make of this, Gregg? It's interesting, especially from, you know, the type of work that you and Debbie do, that he pondered a bombing and then said, hey, and look, when he shot the person, there's a woman standing right there, I presume to be a woman, and he could have taken aim at her. He did not.
Of course. Yeah. This is typical of the predatory violence. There's affective and predatory, but let's just stick with predatory violence because that's really what we're talking about. And it's targeted. They have a specific target. And that's it. That's what they're targeted on. Now, it may be a big target. Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building. I mean, but that was his target. In this case, it's an individual, and it's kind of supported by the quote unquote manifesto or notes. He seems to be going after this guy at that shareholders meeting. So this is specifically targeted, and he doesn't want to do anything else. You know, it's interesting because he referred to Ted Kaczynski and kind of like Ted, but Ted was one of these bombers that murdered 3 people and injured 23 others, and they weren't always his necessarily intended targets. So he's being a little more careful or specific about what he's what he's doing. But again, another acronym I'll go back to, I mentioned on a previous show, we're talking about something else, but there's a ton of research that supports the idea about the justification. They definitely feel justified in what they're doing, all these lone actors. Gavin DeBecker, who does some security, published a book called The Gift of Fear, and he lays out in there this acronym JACA, J-A-C-A. Justified, they feel justified. Then A, no other alternative other than violence. C, not concerned with the consequences. And the last A is the ability to carry it out. And so when those 4 things align, when someone feels justified in the homicide or the violence, they see no other alternative, they don't care about the consequences, and they have the ability to carry it out, then we've reached critical mass. When something like this is going to happen, but there's a lot of planning, and we see that in his writings. I think more of that comes out. But again, that's the predatory violence rather than affective, which is very emotional. It's rage-filled. Think of road rage, for example. It's just an explosive rage. Somebody kills somebody, or a bar fight, or something like that. That's the most common type of violence, but this is planned, it's purposeful, it's predatory, it takes place over a period of time where and it lacks any sort of emotional arousal, any sort of affective arousal. You can see it in the shooting in the film. Very cold, just shoots him, goes up, checks, and then jogs off, between the cars. He's not kicking, not punching, not screaming, not yelling. So this is exactly what we're dealing with, this predatory violence.
Yeah, by the way, he's not doing any of the kicking and screaming until he gets brought into court. I'm going to play that for Gregg and the rest of the guests. But Gregg, did you ever deal with a Unabomber in your career?
Everybody had a piece of that at some point over the years. And that's a good example too of this planned, predatory, cold, emotionless violence, that just sending out these bombs, year after going on for a year, and not rage-filled, but deadly, nonetheless. So yeah,
interesting. Back to Dr. Goodman here from Mary Kolovich. There's a bunch of questions here. Why do you think he didn't get rid of the weapon? Do you think he wanted to be caught? Followed by Ruffin Roffer, which sounds like a Dr. Seuss name. Why did he stay around when he had the money and the means to get far away? Do you think he wanted to get caught? People are wondering, is there an element, like he'd been running from the family? We don't know. Everyone's talking about how schizophrenia kicks in. I'm not saying he has it at roughly the age that he's at now. What's up, Space Coast? Nothing gets done without Space Coast on the West Coast. Shout out to him, the COE. Robin, for the super chat. Thank you so much. But what about this notion? Maybe he was just feeling so alone and desperate. Is there an element, do you think, that he did want some sort of saving, some sort of salvation to get caught here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate the analysis from the audience and those types of questions. And we could really answer both ways. There is a theory in criminology called Thanatos, and it speaks to death wish, and really how modern day analysts interpret it is just what you're saying, and what the audience members are saying, that sometimes people will even leave behind key pieces of evidence at times, and clearly Gregg knows, sometimes we see driver's licenses left behind and things that are so implicating. But do I think he wanted to get caught? I actually think he did not. I think he hoped that he could stretch this out for quite a while, because if he really wanted to get caught, I think he would have almost stayed within a close proximity to the crime scene, knowing that there would be surveillance, knowing that NYPD is so good at what they do. And I think he would have stayed literally closer to the scene. However, I will say this. I think that now that the entire world is talking about him and what's happened, I actually think he is enjoying the spotlight. Not uncommon at all for serial murderers, mass murderers, and even those who participate in alleged singular homicides, when all of a sudden they're getting attention. Now, interestingly, we have something in criminology. It's its own area and category, and it's called hybristophilia. And that really speaks to when people become enamored by, intrigued with people who commit violent crimes. And so, who might come to mind in that category would be people such as a Ted Bundy and Charles Manson and the Menendez brothers and Chris Watts. And yet, you know, we're going to have people who are literally with fan clubs for these people. And it's not exclusive to men. We have female killers, alleged killers, the likes of which Casey Anthony and Susan Smith, Jodi Arias, and they garner a lot of attention as well. So do I think as a criminologist he wanted to get caught? I don't think so. But I do think he is enjoying with great pleasure, unfortunately, people talking about him, people knowing who he is, knowing what he did, understanding seemingly his ideology, his platform. And I think he's enjoying this.
You see here from Chester's mom, he also may have simply believed in his cause. That sounds like something my dad, who's a psychiatrist, would say. He would always break things down very simply without all the labels, and he made a really bad choice here. Lexie, back to you. So he's being charged. New York City, it's sort of standard. It's second-degree murder, not first-degree. If you want to maybe explain that a little bit, but also he has pleaded not guilty to weapons charges in Pennsylvania. So let's start there from a legal perspective. Why the second-degree murder? If someone hears this, they're thinking in their head, it's got to be first-degree murder. And I was just listening to someone on the radio who was saying, like, you know, New York is obviously a fairly liberal state, and they think that this person will eventually probably be paroled or get out of prison. Maybe, we don't know, because New York, if this happened in Texas or here in Florida, zero chance of that. But what? So why the second-degree murder? Let's start there.
Well, first-degree murder in New York is, you have to meet certain categories. It's murder of a judge, murder of a police officer, murder of, I think, an officer of the peace. So the victim categories don't fit in. There also are other ways for it to become first-degree murder, such as torture, whether the person's doing it for pecuniary gain. I think there's felony murder too, if it happens in the course of an armed robbery or something of that nature. So that's why it's not first-degree murder, because it just doesn't fit into any of those categories. However, it is no less heinous, of course. In terms of eligibility for parole, you know, in New Jersey where I practice, it really kind of depends. It depends on the prosecutor. It depends on the evidence. It depends on the judge and the sentencing, whether the person's entitled to that. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible that he could be eligible for parole after a certain period of time, but there's been so much public attention on this, and it was cold-blooded, it was heinous. There was really just no justification for it. There's no real mitigation for it. I guess he could try to argue at the time that he's sentenced, you know, if it gets that far, that he was, you know, under mental duress based on whatever his injuries were or whatever his body couldn't recover from, or there have been reports about his mom potentially being denied access to healthcare or meeting her deductible, which was interesting to me because I don't know if that reporting is accurate, but he apparently comes from a fairly privileged family. And so, you know, I'm not sure that a $6,000 deductible for people who live in an $800,000 house and send their child to a $40,000 a year school is really going to matter.
Yeah, they're one of the wealthiest families in this section. But I think that may have been from a sort of false initial manifesto put out there, because I don't know that has been corroborated. Yeah.
And that's the other thing to keep in mind is that you hear so much stuff that's not corroborated. It's not coming from law enforcement. It's just coming from people online who are putting things out, and you don't necessarily know what to believe. When I heard his name was Luigi Mangione, I saw it on social media, I thought, all right, well, I'm gonna have to look into that and actually make sure it's true, because a lot of these things that you hear don't end up turning out to be accurate. I saw the picture of his back with the screws, and I thought, okay, well, we'll see if that's accurate too. But yeah, murder one is not what he could be charged with in this case.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out now why there's always a tech issue on this show, but now my light is doing something weird. But anyway, by the way, Lexie, I got to get me one of those New Jersey plates, not a nice
Isn't that
actual
cool?
plate. Yeah, it's very cool. You got to tell me where you.
Store. I got an antique store.
Oh,
New Jersey's all over the news because of the drones. So
oh, there you go. I'm gonna have to
wrapping
search.
my
That's
face.
those drones are a whole other story. I'm thinking of doing that actually because we
Yeah,
have
they are.
Rob D'Amico from the FBI. He was like on a counter drone team, which I didn't even know they had. But
Yeah.
from this interesting question, I got a few in a row here for Gregg. So apologies in advance to the two women. But why didn't you go after the surgeon, Gregg, who failed his surgery? If his back pain is motivation, followed by this comment. Someone on YouTube, a doctor, looked at the x-ray, said the first surgery was botched. A second surgery would have corrected it, which he could afford. Great question. I didn't even think about that. Why not go after the surgeon? Why go after the guy who's the head of the healthcare company?
Well, again, we're getting conflicting information. I had heard reporting earlier that he thought the initial surgery was good. Now, maybe it went bad after a while. I don't really know. But for whatever reason, they get fixated on a particular issue. And for him, I think it was more of this global issue with healthcare. And he's going big rather than a personal retribution against an individual. Mr. Thompson was a symbolic victim. I don't think there's going to be any chance that Mr. Thompson personally intervened in some coverage that he had and denied him, or it's not anything like that. So he's a symbolic victim, and I think that's the issue. He was going after the entire healthcare, machine out there, and especially this particular insurance agency, which has a reputation of being responsible for denying a lot of claims. But again, these things are multi-determined. They're biopsychosocial. I mean, he detached from his social network, the family and the friends. So there's nobody there to mitigate when his beliefs start to go off the rails. He doesn't have anybody around him to kind of talk him down or to mitigate against this. And then this devolutionary spiral kicks in and he gets fixated on this particular issue, then sees himself as this avenging angel of death or whatever. He's going to come in and right this wrong and start this revolution maybe, or go on. And he may have been planning to do more things as well. Could be the reason he still had the gun and, all of that. So we don't know. That's certainly something investigators will be, will be checking out as well.
Yeah.
So,
and Gregg, I got to ask you about the gun. So apparently it's at the New York, the NYPD crime lab. What do they do with this gun at the crime lab? How is it processed? What are they doing with it?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's going to go through a number of different tests to go through there. One was the ballistics that we've talked about, but first it'll be processed for fingerprints and DNA and all of that, even though we know he had it. So it's going to be no surprise, but we want to know if there's somebody else's fingerprints on there or somebody else's DNA. We're going to want to make sure we don't leave anything, undetected here. And then it'll be used. And if the projectiles, I don't even know that they need to do it, but at this point, because they match the shell casings, but if the projectiles, the bullets are suitable for comparison, if they have the lands and grooves, they may, again, fire those weapons and check the projectiles against the projectiles that were recovered at the scene or from the body of Mr. Thompson. So that's basically what they'll do with the weapon.
Inside baseball there from our friend who is back now, Philadelphia shoulder surgeon. She knows a lot about surgery. This is to Dr. Goodman. Is he going to stay with his public defender? I did not realize that Tom Dickey was a public defender, or end up hiring a lawyer, which probably requires family going against his anti-capitalist rant. That's what's interesting to me here, Dr. Goodman, is, you've got these types who are out in the public who are, they want socialized medicine, but they come from privilege. How do they square that in their own mind? Do they see the irony here that now he's probably going to hire the family will, a super high profile, super expensive attorney, when his thinking partly in doing the crime is that everyone should have affordable health care. But he's one of these people that certainly is not in that situation where they could not afford it.
Right, and therein lies the irony to decision making. So, one of the audience members had said earlier in the chat that most likely he believes strongly in the cause. So that doesn't go away. You know, he's pleading not guilty, right? So we have a not guilty plea. I think public defenders do a great job. So, I'm sure the individual working with him is doing his very best. But what's the reality? The reality is that a family with comfort, with wealth, with privilege will likely, as we're speaking, be on the phone with a dozen of the best and the brightest attorneys in the country to potentially put together what the platform will be. Now, again, the four of us, as well as the audience, we have ideas and opinions of what potentially he would use as a defense. What is that going to be? Now, one thing I could tell you as a criminologist, and I'm all about data, I cannot see nor believe anything along the lines of an insanity defense, because what would that mean? That would mean the individual doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know what he's doing is wrong. So for me, that's off the table. And also, I believe heavily in data. We look at what's the data analytics on insanity, and less than 2%. So it wouldn't appear to me that that's a viable option. Now, back to what some of the guests have said, is it this extreme pain that potentially he was in? You know, we're getting these conflicting reports because we're a few days in, so we're not sure what's 100% credible versus what's just being discussed. But was the surgery successful at some point? Now, you know, the time of the shooting, is he in excruciating pain? What type of medicine, if any, was he taking? Could that have potentially altered prudent decision making? We're also hearing reports that he may have been experimenting with hallucinogenics and mushrooms, and that could also lead to flawed decision making. So obviously, it's still a wait and see. But to your original question, I think that the family will likely be moving in the direction, whether Luigi agrees with it or not, of hiring a defense team of experts.
Yeah, someone had an interesting comment. Why stop with the healthcare CEO? Why not go after the McDonald's CEO for, you know, serving horrible food to Americans? Although a lot of Americans join it. So the questions are kind of endless. Again, this is something my dad would say. I find this interesting. In my opinion, he's just a spoiled brat who's mad. He had some back pain first time in his life. He's inconvenienced. Could be as simple as that. We just simply don't know. Back to Lexie on the extradition issue. He's fighting extradition to New York, which is really going to end up just being a formality. There's something called a governor's warrant. They're going to send him there. I heard today he probably won't step foot in New York till after the first of the year. Legally, is this just, you know, on his part, just kind of gamesmanship? Because there's no doubt he's getting yanked back to New York at some point, right?
Yeah, this is just trying to put the state through their paces. It's like if you, I remember when I was a young lawyer, I was at a hearing with an attorney, and he didn't disagree with the relief that was being sought by the state, but he was going to do a cross-examination anyway. And I said, why are you doing this if you don't actually disagree with the motion? He said, oh, you know, you get dressed for church. You gotta give the people something to look at. So I really think that this is just to buy some time. It's a formality. It's putting the state through its paces. If he's pleading not guilty and he's trying to convince people that, or maybe his family, that it wasn't him, there's no way he's going to say, yeah, you're right, there is good cause to send me. There's probable cause to send me to New York for an extradition because, yeah, you're right, it probably was me. I mean, I understand why his attorney wouldn't agree to it. I understand why he would want to fight it. I believe, I don't know. I'm sure somebody will know in the comments, but I don't know if Brian Koberger fought it too, or for at least a little bit. But ultimately, it's going to be ordered, and he's going to be back to New York. And one of the questions I wanted to respond to about whether he would stay with a public defender, which was not my understanding that Dickie is a public defender, but he may be, or hire a private attorney. You know, allegedly, the family knew that he was missing in November in November and hadn't heard from him. And then his face is flashed all over the news. I mean, literally everybody knows what this guy looks like, so much so that he's wearing a mask at a McDonald's and a stranger recognizes him. So the fact that his parents didn't turn him in, which I'm sure there are going to be people saying, well, you wouldn't turn in your son, or I wouldn't turn in my daughter. I would turn in my son, for the record. He's not watching, but if he were, I would turn in my son. And I think that the fact that nobody in his family spoke up, nobody did turn him in or say that's our son, we know who he is, and this is the right thing to do. I would not be surprised in that context if they did hire him private counsel in New York.
Yeah. And by the way, they interviewed some friends who said their excuse was there are so many Italians in New York, I never would have recognized them. I have the exact quote further down, but that was an interesting way of putting it, I guess. Here's some video that I want to show Gregg and Debbie Goodman. It's a short clip, and it's just, I don't think I can. Here we go. This is it. This is what's going on in New York City today. These popped up all over New York today, and it's obviously blurred out because that's what the news does. But these are wanted posters within the healthcare industry. Gregg, the posters bearing the names and photos of Brian Thompson and other high-profile health insurance executives. Again, they started popping up around Manhattan today on scaffoldings. The big green boxes you see all over New York City. I guess they're like power type boxes. The posters warn that healthcare CEOs should not feel safe, and they included the words deny, defend, depose, which are now famously written on the bullets. Are you at all surprised that now there's like this grassroots effort, that there's people out there putting up these wanted posters? And how seriously does your old agency, the FBI, need to take this so another healthcare executive is not killed?
Sure. I'm not surprised because we saw the explosion of this right after the explosion of the public sentiment, kind of making the shooter an anti-hero, kind of, lionizing him and going after the healthcare, going after the victim in this particular case. He had it coming, and how many people has he killed? And, you saw this huge response to this from the public, which I think just this whole thing is a symptom of the underlying problems with healthcare and how upset and angry people are. So you absolutely need to be concerned about this because even without this specific targeted group, anytime there's a well-publicized murder like this, or mass murder, even a single murder like this, and this has been, as you know, publicized nationwide, worldwide, you're at a higher risk for at least the next week or two of a contagion, of a copycat effect. This whole contagion issue is real. So not only healthcare people, but executives in other areas and so forth, I'm sure they're ramping up their security and being concerned about that. And the big problem, and this is a whole other discussion, I work with the threat assessment group run by Dr. Park Dietz, forensic psychiatrist. We do a lot of risk of violence prevention, which I did with the Bureau as well. It's very challenging because the issue, some people say, well, you're trying to find the needle in the haystack. It's more difficult than that. You're trying to determine which piece of hay is going to become a needle, which is a different thing altogether. In other words, people who make a threat don't always pose a threat. Those people who pose a threat don't make a threat. And so when you're trying to figure out who really poses a threat and how to mitigate that, it becomes, it's a real challenge. And I think in this case, at least up to now, we haven't seen any overt threats or leakage from this shooter. He wasn't Facebook posting or ranting about any of this stuff. He may have been doing it private in these journals and things that we're seeing come out, but nothing publicly that would trigger an alarm or trigger somebody to take a look. And that's your fear. These paranoid ideations take hold, and they don't trust anybody. They devolve, they disengage socially, and just keep it all to themselves and then explode. And that seems to be what we had in this case.
Yeah, and I apologize in advance, Debbie. I'm about to cut you off for a second, but Gregg, when we're looking at this, I mean, people are asking. It's a good question. I mean, where's the nexus here between a crime and the First Amendment? Because it appears that they are threats. But how do you negotiate?
Well, that's it. I teach threat assessment. I say, what's a threat? What's a threat? I'll give you an example. We had a woman, a case who was gunned down by her guy she wouldn't date, basically. Came in the workplace and shot her up. He made statements like, "I know where your sister lives." Is that a threat? Depends on context, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's so context dependent in the situation. So what is a threat? It becomes, on the face of it, it seems maybe easy, but you get into it, it's far more difficult than that. So yeah, it is the First Amendment versus, overt threat sort of thing. But again, what we're dealing with is the danger of these other individuals that are out there who are on the edge, and they're going to see this guy as somebody who did the right thing, and now they're going to do it. We look at any number of examples. Cho at Virginia Tech, who shot up that, he lionized the Columbine shooters, and he wanted to get a bigger body count than they had. And even this guy, he likes Ted Kaczynski, thinks he's I forget the political activist. I think he said something like that. No, he's not. He's a killer. But they gravitate to these anti-heroes, identify with them, get this warrior mentality, and then go out and do it. And that's what we're afraid of. In a case like this, somebody else is on the edge. This may push them over.
It's so fascinating to hear from Gregg, who spent so many years, and as you hear, he's still teaching, threat assessment and other, related topics. This is true. He seems to have been sort of universally liked by his friends and his family. Debbie, back to the wanted posters for a second. People are saying they're disgusted by it. Well, on top of that, all day, Amazon's been taking down products people have been putting up that basically say hashtag free Luigi or the words deny, depose, defend. This phrasing it a slightly different way, but what is going on in the world now? I mean, there's obviously tremendous frustration, and literally around the world, because we've got the Philippines joining us. Hello. But what's going on here that now people are selling the merchandise? You've seen mugshots of famous people before. That's not necessarily new, but for someone who just gunned someone down in cold blood, is there something to be said about our society just becoming desensitized to everything?
Yeah, I think that's a good word to use, Joel. Unfortunately, it appears to me, as we're all following the case closely, the last few days, we seem to have a group of people who are recognizing the horrible, horrendous nature of what's happened here, that an innocent individual who happens to be a CEO, but he is indeed a husband and a father, and he was gunned down in the streets of New York. And how can we applaud and appreciate and admire vigilante justice? I don't see any way, shape, or form that we can. And yet, here's this next group that we're discussing, who seems to have this great affinity toward and admiration of not only this individual directly, Luigi, but some way, somehow, of the concept. It's almost like the giant versus the speck. The little guy and the little chihuahua in the fight is taking down the big dog. And some way, somehow, this mushroom effect of people not only agreeing with it seemingly, but egging it on and encouraging it and having good words to say about Luigi Mangione is really troubling. And so, in part, I think this desensitization is happening, but also what's happening, it's almost like fantasy land. For me, on this case, there's fan and there's fanatic. So the fan base that many people have, and it's totally normal in psychology to be a fan of an athlete, a musician, an actor, an actress, and such. So that's normal. But then I think we're almost in this fanatic zone among some where people are being applauded and awarded almost for violent crime, for vigilante justice. There's simply no place for it. I believe that, our justice system will do the right thing. And once this proceeds, and if he is indeed the individual we think he is, then there's got to be swift, severe, and certain penalty. Some of the comments made earlier too, I'd like to add to. It is a very considerable concern, this contagion effect, the copycat people who are out there. And I'm always concerned about that as a criminologist. Anytime we have any type of high profile killing, again, whether it's a singular, double, triple, and such, and school based, and because so much attention and spotlight is on this case and this individual, just what was said earlier, there are other people now almost, teeter-tottering on very violent ideology. In criminology, Joel, we call it mens rea actus reus. Mens rea, it's the thinking about the crime or the criminal mindset. Okay, that's one part, but nobody really knows what somebody's thinking unless it's expressed, unless it's discussed. But the second piece is equally concerning, and that's what we call the actus reus. That's the criminal action itself. So generally, when we have both, the person thinks about the crime, but people may think about committing crime and they'll never do it. However, thinking about it and doing it, this is where we are with potentially this case. And now the concern is that other people may indeed want to do something of a similar magnitude because they want attention as well.
Well, your mic isn't working.
Can't hear you.
I muted myself. I always do that. No, I was going to say that it's just what the doctor was just saying is fascinating on many different levels. Putting the card, and by the way, thanks to Paul K here for the super chat. What affects one can infect all. Great quote.
If I may jump in just for a second here and springboard off this idea. It's not really new. If we go back to the Gilded Age and the robber barons and all that, you had a lot of public support for Bonnie and Clyde, for Machine Gun Kelly, because they were robbing the banks. I mean, the robber barons were the bankers who were creating hell for the little guys, right? Foreclosing on mortgages and taking property and amassing these vast riches for themselves, while everybody else was suffering. Well, somebody like Bonnie and Clyde comes along, start robbing banks. The public is cheering them on because they're sticking it to the big bad guy. And this is exactly the mindset that we're seeing play out again. So what's old is not, it's new again. And here we are back in just a different setting here with the healthcare thing rather than the Gilded Age of the robber barons. But it's the same sociological dynamic in play.
Yeah, they say everything is cyclical, so maybe it's just coming full circle.
Here we are again.
Yep. Lexie, to you, I mean, this is putting the cart ahead of the horse. We don't know how this is all going to play out legally, but if it goes to trial, and it would go to trial in New York, how tough, especially in a place like New York, which again is more liberal than a place like Florida, and so there might be more people sympathetic to him. How tough is it going to be to seat a jury? We see these posters going up in New York City today. By the way, either Nikki or Ken Jen said they didn't see any. They were all apparently taken down right away, either by the NYPD or citizens. I'm sure they're going to go right back up at some point. But Lexie, what about seating a fair jury here? Is that possible?
I mean, I think so. We seated a jury. Whether you think the verdicts are fair, I guess, is another issue. But we seated a jury in Donald Trump, Hunter Biden, O.J. Simpson. I mean, you've seated juries in all of these high-profile cases, and they have safeguards, they have voir dire, they have peremptory strikes. I mean, they're just going to end up having to seat a jury if this goes to trial. I really don't think that this is a situation where there's going to be jury nullification. I know people have said that. That seems like maybe with what's coming out, his only hope. But I think that most people find this to be heinous. And I think that the job of the state will be to weed out the type of people that would nullify the verdict. And obviously the defense would want those types of people on. But I think that the juries are generally fair. They generally get the right people on there. So I don't really think that's necessarily a realistic concern. And I wanted to piggyback on something that you guys were talking about. And Neil J actually made a good point that I was going to make myself about all this stuff you're seeing online. I think people are so desensitized to this type of thing because 50 years ago, all you would have is a newspaper report about it and maybe a very stilted evening news bulletin about it. But you certainly wouldn't have the anchor or the newspaper reporter saying, he's hot, he's got a six-pack, he was so nice as a roommate, oh my God, his eyebrows. So, when you're fed a steady diet of that type of stuff, it is really unfair what the healthcare system, system's doing. Can you really blame them? You're fed a steady diet of that. It almost gets into the bloodstream. I don't agree with any of it, but I understand why people see this and they go, oh, this again. Well, my aunt was denied for her surgery. It is BS what's going on in the healthcare system. So I do think that social media has desensitized these types of crimes and violence so much more than if all we were doing is reading an impassioned newspaper article 50 years ago.
Great point. I agree with you 1,000%. Add to the mix video games. Some people think that he might have learned his shooting stance from Call of Duty or one of those games as opposed to in a firing range the way Gregg did when he learned how to shoot a gun. This fascinates me, Dr. Goodman. This is your wheelhouse. Is it possible that the CEO, by the way, I grew up with Jeff and Glenn Ally. I wonder if James is related. Is it possible that the CEO planned his own assassination? The timing was too perfect. I know that United Healthcare is being investigated for crimes. There's just 1,000,001, and I'm not trying to throw James under the bus here, either conspiracy theorists or just theorists out there. But it's usually the old Occam's razor, which is the simplest thing is the simplest thing. By all accounts, he was in an estranged marriage, was not living with his wife, but he's got 2 kids that you presume he was in love with, loved very much. They're both great athletes. What do you say about this when people start questioning almost everything? And I had people fighting with me yesterday on Twitter. By the way, it's at podcast STS, and I'm putting out a lot of news there. But I had people fighting with me saying they framed this guy. And I had to sit there and list, I don't know why I didn't have to, but I did it like an idiot. But I was listing the evidence. So what's going on here with people who are either in denial or looking for another sort of answer that goes against the grain of what is, I guess, obvious and most simple?
Right. Well, first, let me answer respectfully and always submit that I appreciate and value all types of opinions and all types of views, because what I think is so important, and certainly your podcast, Joel, the opportunity to educate, to discuss, to communicate. And at the moment, there's not necessarily, it's not so much a right versus wrong. But I think at the moment, the fact that people are discussing, analyzing, communicating, that's very important because it's an educational, platform. However, if you're asking me now directly to that issue, I would have to respectfully disagree. I don't think this individual, nor many individuals, unless they are suicidal, would actually be an active participant in one's own murder. So although I have read about it, and again, I'm reading online and appreciating different points of view, I personally and professionally would not subscribe to that. I think, again, that Luigi Mangione gave careful consideration to what he was going to do. He did plan it. What's interesting is that as smart as he is, right, from the academic and educational standpoint, and I'm a professor, so I appreciate, the status that one would have achieved as a valedictorian. That takes a lot of determination and dedication and hard work, and certainly his academic achievements at his Ivy League university. But there's a but. You know, many of these killers think because they are smart in a domain, let's call it, of academics and schooling, that they feel they're smarter than law enforcement. And I vehemently disagree with that. And I love, respect, and appreciate our law enforcement representatives as we speak. We have nearly 1 million men and women of local, state, and federal service who do so much for so many. And I do think, you know, a consortium of law enforcement representatives should be commended here, as well as the public. It's critical that individual citizens get involved and to see something, say something, and that's what happened. But did this Mr. Thompson some way, somehow participate in his own demise? I say no.
Yeah. By the way, about a day before this happened, I think it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I saw a Philadelphia shoulder surgeon commenting in the chat. They announced that they were going to put limits on anesthesia, which is crazy, right? I mean, Gregg, I think that happened the day before when this happened, or 2 days before, or whatever. But when this happened, they immediately put a statement basically backtracking. But could that have potentially, Gregg, that was not the question I was coming to you with. Could that have potentially been a trigger for him to say, okay, I'm doing this now?
Well, yeah, I think he was there to do it, but that could have been another antagonizing factor. Again, these are multi-determined issues, but yeah, if he saw that, I'm sure that would only reinforce this belief that he had. And we're talking here about these refer to them as extreme overvalued beliefs. In other words, he's got a belief, but they overvalue it extremely so. About the wrongfulness of what they do, which in their mind they use, it becomes a justification for the murder, and something like that. Blue Cross comes out and says, well, we're only going to allow so much anesthesia only for so long. If the surgery goes on without that, well, then no anesthesia covered. At that point, people are going to go, WTF? I mean, are you kidding me? What and we're all going to be outraged, by that. But that could really be another thing that would just support his sense of righteousness, rage, and further justify what he was going to do. Another question that came up, I was reading as you're going along, it was one we discussed the other night, and I still have a question about this. And maybe he was just lucky, but his timing to get at that hotel early that morning and just before this guy came out, I mean, was he lucky? Did he have a co-conspirator of some sort? I mean, I don't want to get into conspiratorial stuff necessarily, but sometimes these guys just get lucky, and maybe he just got lucky that morning. But I'd like to know who he was talking to on the phone. There's a video of him walking down the street before the shooting, and hopefully they'll crack the phone and get in there and figure out who he was talking to. But it's it's a valid question as to, how did he happen to get there at the right time when he was just coming out?
And that's what I was just going to ask you. And I'm sad that you don't have an answer for us. There were some reports, because he's like a tech expert. There were some reports, not confirmed, that he was maybe able to hack into his calendar, which seems straight out of a movie. I don't know. I'm completely horrible with tech. So I would have no idea how easy it seems like it would be fairly hard to do. But for him to have that timing, it is definitely curious. And I think that they're definitely going to be looking into that.
Absolutely going to be a big investigative avenue. They're going to want to nail all that stuff down.
Make sure, like you heard, make sure there's no co-conspirator. Dr. Goodman, to you, a lot of people have been asking, number one, do you think he was going to strike again? That's why he had the weapon. Number two, does he have the kind of personality that you've seen exhibited so far, where you think he was planning to unalive himself? That's the word we use on YouTube, so don't yell at me. But do you think that was in his plans, or he was going to let himself get caught, which is what happened?
Yeah, I like both questions. So we'll start with, 1A, 1B. Would he have struck again? I don't think so. So my belief about these individuals who participate in the planning, the intent, all of the elements of first degree, willful, with malice and such, they have an intended target. They feel they've accomplished their plan, plan the work the plan is how many of these people operate. And so I don't think he would have done a secondary killing on the unlive, or we can also perhaps say self-inflict. I'm surprised that he didn't, because quite frankly, when we evaluate a variety of categories of killers, and not all of whom leave a manifesto or some type of written document that's supposed to give us a glimpse into their thoughts and their ideology and their causation and motivation, many of whom self-inflict first, and then we find perhaps details of what was in their minds. So I don't think he was going to. I almost think, the more we're talking about this case, and still many of us are involved with the Brian Koberger case in Idaho, again, alleged quadruple murderer. But for me, when they self-inflict, it's almost as if they've experienced their own levels of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and sometimes these killers will victimize so many, as we've seen time and time again, and then they self-inflict. But when they do not, and we look at others, such as a Nicholas Cruz. I reside in Florida. I was heavily involved in that case, and you wonder why. And for me, I do think that part of this motivation for many of them is the attention. They're enjoying the spotlight. They want attention, and it is possible they want attention to their cause. But would he have unlived or self-inflicted? I don't believe so. I think he actually, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but one last thing about the gun, and I appreciate all the, theories about why did he keep it. For me, why did he keep it? Because it was a pleasantry for him. He would revisit, he would look at it, he would recognize that he, had a plan, he followed it out. In his mind, it was successful. And I think that's why he maintained possession of the gun.
Lexie, I promise I'm coming back to you. But Gregg, I pulled up this photo on the right. Number one, I've never seen a photo released publicly of someone in a holding cell, only mugshots. I heard that the reason they released it was to show it to the people at the McDonald's to verify, positively ID him instead of a lineup. And then secondly, if you look in his groin area, it looks like there is a wet mark all around. It's tough to see on this shot, but police did say when they picked him up, he had a physical reaction. He was shaking. Do you think he peed his pants? Number one. And number two, have you ever seen a shot like this? I don't recall ever seeing one.
And it's an unusual photo for sure. Usually you get just the mugshot thing. Did he urinate when he was getting arrested? Could have. I've had that happen in arrests that I've made. Not that I've urinated, but the person being arrested urinated. It's the fight or flight syndrome. I mean, it just kicks in, and it's an involuntary bodily response. Your body just gets rid of what it doesn't need because it knows it's in serious trouble. And, that may well be because they talked about how he began shaking when they asked him had he been in New York recently. And I think at that point he knew it was over, at that point. So,
yeah.
I don't know for sure, but
I mean, the amount of people, again, just going back to this on social media last night that said that they have the wrong guy. I just can't wrap my head. And look, he's got to have his day in court. I'm not saying that that's not supposed to happen and all the evidence has to be presented. But at this point, it is a Mount Everest of evidence right now. Thank you to Paul K here. Great show, great guest. This reminds you of a movie. Oh, yeah. A COE. If you're back, we already put that one up, but thank you. To Lexie, all these went up already, COE, but we like to do things twice. That's okay.
You put up the one that says that they love Gregg and he's what a muffin or something. Whatever that one was.
I think that was Nikki Cuds.
That was cute. I mean, I know. I think I don't know who though. I think it was the spine surgeon, the Philly spine surgeon.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Philly shoulder, not spine, but close.
Right. Okay.
But Lexie, to you, this is odd. He's being held in a state prison in Philadelphia. The thing was built, I read, in 1889. It is super creepy looking. It's the first prison, one of the first built in this, I think the first built in the state of Pennsylvania, one of the first in the country. Why in a state prison, not in a typical, why not at the county jail, which I think is Blair County, where Altoona is?
You know, frankly, I don't know. All I can assume is that maybe the Altoona County Jail, maybe they have concerns about security, both for him and for other inmates. And there's some reason that he needs to be in some type of different setup than they just have in a normal county jail. I mean, that's really the only thing. It might have to do with his safety, the safety of the officers, the safety of other inmates. That's probably that's my best guess in terms of why they would have done that, because that's not standard operating procedure, at least where I am. But I wanted to go back to the question about the I wrote it down about whether he planned his own suicide. I know we kind of, well plowed ground, but I saw somebody make that point on a network. A guest had made that point, and I just think it's I think that if you were going to do that, you wouldn't do it in New York City necessarily, because you would want to also protect the person that did it, that you were paying to have do that. So you wouldn't want all those cameras and all those eyeballs around you. And also, if somebody were to do that, then it was miraculous that they found somebody who has had so many other issues with the healthcare industry for so long. I mean, there are just too many coincidences. Occam's razor, I think that you mentioned. I mean, it's just not a reasonable theory. And for every theory you have another theory. You have so many conspiracy theories out there. I'm shocked at the amount of people on X saying that they don't have the right guy. And then they're doing a split screen of one picture of his eyebrows and another picture of his eyebrows. I mean, like looking at essentially two blurry pictures and saying that can't be the right guy because the eyebrows don't look the same. What I'm very interested in eventually hearing about is that woman that was in the video where he was standing there shooting and she's right there and she kind of scurries off. I'm sure she either isn't talking, isn't allowed to talk, but I'm very interested to hear who that is, how she felt, what she saw eventually, because she was really right in the thick of it. She's probably the number one eyewitness that there is.
Gregg, on that, and I want to show you this video from yesterday, but I just completely lost my train of thought right there. What were you just talking about, Lexie? What were you saying?
The woman in the video who scurried
off.
Oh, yeah,
right. So, Gregg, with her, or I assume it's a woman, she's literally like in the line of fire. And he looks over at her.
Right.
Has NYPD told her, please do not talk to anyone, and she's respecting that, and because she's a potential witness at a trial, or is she just not speaking out of fear, or both of those things?
Yeah, I think probably all of the above. I mean, if they've got her as a potential witness, they're going to not want her talking to anybody. That's for sure. And she may attract the ire of some of his would-be supporters out there as well. Because we saw that before. While he was still on the run, you had all those people saying, "Oh, don't narc him out. Don't dime him out. Don't do that." And you have all that going on. So she.
By the way, but these jeans here, by the way, some are saying that they make a designer jean now, believe it or not, made to look like that. So there you go. That's another possibility. This, of course, is the video from yesterday. This is for Gregg and then Debbie here. Let's watch this together.
Down.
Oh my God, that's completely out of touch. And it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
I'm going to play it back. Completely out of touch with the reality of the American lived experience. What do you make of this, Gregg? That we saw him initially, I think, going into court. He was very quiet. This time around is the next day. He's got something to say, and he's basically grabbed by police and ushered inside. A lot of people said that they would be screaming too if because they have the officer kind of puts his thumb into his neck, but he does it after he starts yelling. What is happening here from a profiling perspective?
Well, I think he's to me, trying to self-justify what he's doing, talking about the American people are too intelligent to be, whatever it was, abused by the healthcare system, you know, this sort of thing. This is this extreme overvalued opinion that he has about this stuff, and he's not letting go. I mean, he's trying to express it at that point. You do see a little anger with him, you know, at this point, because he feels he's right. He's again justified in what he's done, and that's, you know, that's what it is. You know, it's interesting too. I also understand that he, you know, that the other thing, and I'm just kind of free associating here, but this idea that he wanted to get caught, you know, I agree with Debbie. No, and you know, I still see people saying that, and that's fine if you know you want to believe that. But they say, well, why would he keep the same coat? And well, part of it is the narcissism. These guys always think they're smarter than the rest of us, and they're going to get away. And it's the narcissism that ultimately leads or contributes to their demise at the end of the day. You know, with this stuff. But if you look at the method and manner in which he perpetrated the crime, the pre-offense, offense, and post-offense behavior, you can see he really was trying to get away with this thing. I mean, he checked in with a fake ID, he paid cash, he conducted pre-attack surveillance, he laid in wait for the guy, you know, he wore a mask, the hoodie and the mask, and then he fled the scene and he eluded you know, capture for several days. He could have turned himself in at any time if he wanted to, you know, if he wanted to get caught, and gotten rid of the false ID, gotten rid of that. I mean, he used the same false ID, the New Jersey driver's license he checked in the hotel to give the cops. I mean, that's going to blow up, and it did, you know, right in his face, you know, to do that. So I don't think it's that he wanted to get caught. I just think he was so narcissistic that he didn't, you know, think he was going to get caught, that he was, you know, he was going to get away with this thing. Obviously he's not criminally experienced, you know, he may be a bright guy, but he's got no street smarts as far as criminal experience and how to plan the escape, you know, as well. But I also think, and to go to the point back to the trial, and again, I'm not the lawyer, but here, but I do think that the insanity thing is not going to work just for those reasons that I articulated. It shows that he knew what he was doing was wrong. All that effort he took to avoid being identified and captured, and all of that goes to the wrongfulness, including the. I understand he had a Faraday bag. He had his cell phone in this Faraday bag, which is keeps the phone from being tracked. Basically, it just stops the signal, so that he didn't want his phone being tracked. To me, that's another issue that shows he was trying to avoid detection and apprehension. And that came up in court, and I understand it was the only thing that he interjected something about, well, no, it was just to keep the rain off. You know, he didn't want the phone to get wet. No, you don't put it in a Faraday bag to keep it dry. You keep it from you know, being tracked. So
yeah, exactly. I think those are the things. Also, well, maybe not the things when you go into concerts. I don't know if those are Faraday bags or not. But Tom Honecker here, Dr. Goodman, to you, that video we just saw there, Tom is saying that's his true nature. Of course, we all remember the smiling photos. So which is it? Do you think that his personality is? I don't mean this from an actual medical perspective, but a split personality where one moment, you know, he is smiling and the next moment he's visibly angry, because that's what it looks like there. And I just want to add, because I mentioned it and I've got it in my notes here, there was something set up from a website called Give, Send, Go, which I guess is you know, not monitored as closely as, let's say, GoFundMe, and people are donating tens of thousands of dollars and adding comments like, Luigi poses no danger to society except to those greedy executives. This is why I'm giving $10. Governors Hochul and Shapiro should pardon him right now. Again, Debbie, that goes to what we were talking about earlier, that it's just collective insanity out there right now about this. And then what about the nature there of his personality being exhibited?
Right. It's a great question coming from the guest and the audience member, and I appreciate that. I would say I don't see any indication thus far. Once again, we're about a week in, of a split personality. But here's what I see. I agree with the narcissism and the grandiosity and the thinking that one is so intelligent and far more intelligent than law enforcement. And my humble opinion there, it's very much aligned with alleged quadruple murderer Brian Koberger. I see some similarity there thus far. But what I will say to the clip that you showed, Joel, of him, it's almost like the moment in time that presents itself to him, to where once again he wants to maintain his strength in his ideology. He wants others to hear him and potentially to agree with him. So thus far, in many ways, just based upon the second part of what you said, that people are wanting to donate to his defense fund and are standing behind him, with him, for him. He's getting a lot of what he wants, a lot of attention, but a focal point on this whole theme of healthcare, either reform or disregard or just pure animus. And people are hearing him and listening to him, and that may be a good thing in part, and it may be a terrible thing. We're still figuring it all out, but to a split personality, I don't see it.
Yeah, by the way, Greg, as I'm watching this and I'm thinking back to the video of him shooting him and then running across the street and then hopping on an e-bike, if you watch him here, you can tell he's athletic. And he's said to have been a very good athlete. And he doesn't look to be in pain to me. I mean, right here, he's like, he's moving on his feet really well. I've had back pain to the point where I'm like crawling around. It hasn't happened in a long time, thank God. I always say my back hurts because of my front. Guy can't get too heavy there, otherwise it hurts the back. But Greg, what about this? I mean, he's moving around. He's agile.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you see it at the crime itself. You see him moving pretty effortlessly through that and jogging off after the shooting. Doesn't seem to be in any pain, hobbling, or anything like that necessarily. And certainly here, he was resisting and kind of struggling with the cops, and he seemed to be okay at this point. Now, it doesn't mean that he might not have pain at other times or something, but we don't know exactly how that plays out. But I would also mention this idea that not necessarily a diagnostic criteria for multiple personality or split personality. We all have different personalities as time goes on, right? We have happy moments. We laugh one minute, we're pissed off the next. We're neutral, in between. So any little window in time doesn't necessarily mean anything, I don't think. Just like the photos we saw him smiling because he was flirting with some clerk, or clerk was flirting with him or something. I mean, that happens all day, every day to all of us. We're happy, we're smiling, we're mad, whatever. It's just different things we go through, and it's no different with him.
That is an amazing point. An interesting question here from Tom Honecker. Will his narcissism cause him to eventually represent himself in court? We don't know that, but Lexie, and I know you're not a psychologist, feel free to take a stab at this one. But also, people were asking, with this evidence mounting against him, I mean, are you fighting this as a criminal defense attorney? Are you trying to tell your client, let's take a plea deal, let's get you out of prison when you're 65 so you can have some years left?
I think you basically do both. You try to see if you can poke holes in anything, if there are any suppression motions that can be filed just to get rid of some of this evidence. But also, I think you're having a frank conversation with your client that you got fingerprints, you got ballistics, you got eyewitnesses, you got video, you got pictures, you got the manifesto. I mean, you have just a whole litany of pieces of evidence. So the best strategy would be if a lawyer on his behalf could try to get rid of some of the evidence that was collected by saying that perhaps there was no reason that he should have been stopped or questioned at all in the McDonald's. I don't think that's going to work, but everything else there would have been fruit of the poisonous tree if they should never have stopped him to begin with. But again, I don't think that's going to be successful, much like I agree with the panel. I don't think an insanity defense is going to be successful. But in terms of representing himself, the people that I've worked with that want to represent themselves, because I've worked with some clients who've been appointed to me, they usually, a lot of them have been in the system for a very long time, and they believe that the system is rigged against them. And they don't actually believe that the people assigned to help them, like lawyers assigned to them, are actually there to help them. They just look at you as another part of the system who's not really there for them, which is not true. There are a lot of really, really great publicly appointed lawyers for people, but they're cynical. And some of them have spent a lifetime in and out of the system, quote unquote. And they also believe that they know a lot from having been in the system. And some of them, frankly, do. I mean, just having been in the system a lot and been to a million hearings and multiple sentencing and been in jail, you've been in prison, you pick up stuff. So a lot of times those are the types of people who have the hubris to believe that they know better and they're able to act in their interests better than you are. This guy has not had the system rigged against him in any objective measure. He might have back pain. Okay, we all have pain. I've had a million battles with the insurance company too about certain things. You can't get anyone on the phone. I get that it's frustrating, but this person is probably the type of person who will trust whoever is either appointed to him if mom and dad don't step in, which it sounds like they already did, or who's paying on his behalf, because he's probably smart enough to know that in general, his family is probably, they're the business people. They're probably the type of people that trust lawyers, doctors, that type of thing.
By the way, this is not just any guy guest, Bestie STS April. This is a legend in the field of criminology, profiling, catching bad guys. Gregg McCrary, special agent to me. Gregg McCrary is joined the FBI back in 1969, and he spent his life doing this kind of work, and he's still at it and still finding it fascinating. The manifesto, Gregg, I'm going to read it super quick here because we don't have a graphic of it. To the feds, I'm like Luigi. To the feds, I'll keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial, some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, a lot of patience. The spiral notebook at present has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. I do apologize for any strife of traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. United is indecipherable word here. Largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It has grown and grown, but is our life expectancy ? No, the reality is these have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, we're almost done. The problem is more complex, but I do not have space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument, but many have illuminated the corruption and greed. Example, Rosenthal from the New York Times, Michael Moore, decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty. Your reaction?
Yeah, this is the justification. He is self-justifying what he's going to do, and he's the first to face this so brutally and head on. And this is how he sees himself and his role is that he's playing in this thing, and he's laying it all out there for us, and for himself too. He's writing it down. He's self-justifying and being righteous in his anger and justified and basically that that's it. This is this extreme overvalued belief that he has, and he's clinging on to this thing, and we're back to that idea of justification and no other alternative. He's not going to take it to court. He's not going to litigate. He's not going to sue. He's not going to do any of that stuff. He doesn't care about the consequences. He's got the ability, and he's just going to go through with this thing. And here we are.
Yeah. Dr. Goodman, I want to get your take as well. For full disclosure, I worked for Michael Moore for a summer, and I told the story today. I was speaking at an event in Miami Beach with my mom, I won the Michael. It was a summer program he was doing live in the UK, and I worked on. But I won the ping pong tournament. I'm proud to say. And Michael Moore gave me a 4-foot trophy, and I took it home. And then he asked for it back. So I've had bitterness towards that guy my entire life. But anyway, long story short, he respected him. Obviously, a guy that, Michael would do these ambush interviews. He made a documentary called Sicko about the healthcare system. He's also very polarizing. Is it any surprise that he was looking up to these types of people?
No, I don't think the manifesto was necessarily a surprise. I don't think the mindset that we're now receiving and hearing and written form, back to that manifesto. For me, it's why I created the war theory on this. All of his verbiage and the word choice so direct and particular. But once again, what strikes me first is this ideology of he's warranted in what he's done. It's something that he believes strongly in. But even, Joel, as you're reading the language in a non-emotional way, some way, somehow, we can still garner the anger that he has toward the hostile nature of what he thinks is wrong about the healthcare industry, and ultimately, again, the platform of being right in his revenge. He takes the revenge. So that's where I'm at thus far with this. But when somebody writes the manifesto, it is like the diary. It is like the deepest truth of what their deepest truth is and what they think, and the fact that he's still spewing this as he's moving from a police car, knowing full well that 20 cameras or more are on him, and wants to make sure people still hear him. So am I surprised? I'm not surprised. I'm surprised he didn't self-inflict.
There you go. Purple coconut. It's a rule on the show. I can't bring it up, but if someone else does. No, the story is not in my book. By the way, there's a little extra to that story. The head writer for Michael Moore was dating Sarah Silverman, the comedian at the time. So Sarah Silverman was in there screaming F-bombs at me to try to foil me mentally while I destroyed her then boyfriend. So that was my payback to Sarah Silverman. But since you mentioned the book, it is on sale on Kindle, $1.99 for just the next 3 weeks. I had to battle my publisher. For me, it's not a money thing. It is, I want to get my mom's story out there. For those who do not know, my mother's a child Holocaust survivor. I wrote a book with the same title as the podcast, and it's a little bit about the Holocaust and a ton about life advice and life perspective from someone who's been through it. Again, on Kindle, $1.99 for the next 3 weeks. And then it goes back to the regular price. I had to wrestle with my publisher over that. Huge thanks to Lexie Rigdon, once a member, always a member of STS Nation, kind of like a Marine. But she reached out and said that she wants to come on as a guest, and I'm glad you did. It was great to have you. Final question for you. If you're his criminal defense attorney now, what are you saying to him? What advice are you giving him?
You just have to be candid with people and say that I try to treat everybody that I represent in the criminal defense context or any context, but like just human beings, and listen to them. I think some of them are used to not being listened to, and some of them have had rough lives, and I try to treat them like human beings and talk to them on their level. And I think that if I were representing him, I would not treat him like, the bad person that we believe he is, but just like a 26-year-old kid or, however old he is, and talk to him frankly and tell him that I'm on his side. I'm there for him, but give him an honest assessment of the evidence that's against him. And right now it seems pretty strong. Obviously, his attorney might not be able to make that leap yet because they really need official discovery. They don't need to be getting their discovery from, CNN and podcasts and everything like that. They need the actual discovery and the documents. So I'd be going through a game plan of if there's any potential way to attack how the evidence was obtained, but just give him an honest assessment after I review the discovery of what he's facing.
Yeah. By the way, this is true. His sister is, I think, a surgeon, maybe back in the Baltimore area, even possibly at Johns Hopkins. I know that I read that prior. A couple more tidbits as we say goodbye. Apparently, he was living in Honolulu, Hawaii, leading up to this crime. He had spent some time in the San Francisco area. He also visited Japan, Dr. Goodman. He apparently said while he was there, because they got reporters who spoke to people, that he loves Japanese culture, but then eventually went on to bash the country, saying, I didn't understand what this was, quote unquote, that Japan was, quote unquote, peak NPC vile, and its citizens display a scary lack of free will. NPC is a video gaming term which stands for non-playable character. And he cited apparently a time that someone had a seizure in the streets of Japan, and he saw that a police officer would not go over and help. This has got to be one tiny piece of the puzzle. Your final thoughts today about putting it all together. What do you see here?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you, Joel and Steve. And it was great listening to Gregg and Lexie, and certainly learned a lot. And also the viewers with their excellent statements and questions. So, for me, there's a past, a present, and a future for every case. So we're going to hear more about his past and his upbringing and such. The present is what he has done. People can have their opinions about who he is, and he took a stand, and some of whom may agree with the ideology, but for many of us, he's alleged to have killed somebody. And again, vigilante justice, I feel there's simply no place for that. And more to come in the future. The whole issue of what's going to be happening with the criminal justice system, which I love, and I believe in the process, and I trust the process. So I will be following it very closely, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and discuss with you and the guests and the viewers.
Amazing. Who else is amazing? Special Agent Gregg McCrary served the nation since 1969. He retired a little while back. Gregg, they talked to his middle school teacher, a woman named Liz Sessler Beckman. She spoke to a station in Erie, Pennsylvania, and she said it just doesn't make any sense. He was never one of the students she was worried about. The person she sees on TV is unrecognizable. The quote is, "It's like a cognitive dissonance between the person that we all knew and the person who would commit such a heinous crime. I am devastated for the Gilman community, his family, and of course, for the victim's family. It's just unthinkable that he would resort to that kind of violence." Seems like kind of a common refrain from people that every time someone commits a crime, you hear a similar type quote. Never thought of him this way. Sometimes you get the opposite, but the majority of the time, this is what we hear. Thank you for being here today. Why do you think that is, and your final thoughts?
Well, yes. I mean, and I think this is a reason, partly at least, for why people around him may not have called him in. It looks like that guy, but nah, he would never do that. That, or there's also a subtext, like it's more self-defense mode. Like, I would know a killer when I saw one, and I couldn't possibly been in the presence of a killer and not known it, because then you don't know when you're in danger. So I think there's a bunch of these reasons they don't call. But again, that idea that people can change over time. And I don't know who you all were in junior high school, but I'm a different guy now than I was then. Hopefully not worse for wear, but yeah, things can change over time. I would just go back to one thing, and I certainly respect Debbie's opinion about whether he would go on to do another crime or not. I wouldn't rule it out. If he'd gotten away with this thing, if he had slipped away, because keep in mind, in Manifesto, he talked about parasites, plural. Parasites have it coming. He may have been emboldened to go out and do it again. He got away with it once, which is what we see in these serial killers. That just fuels the narcissism. They get away with it, and they think they're invulnerable, and then they go out and they do it again. So I wouldn't have ruled that out totally, that if he gotten away with this thing and slipped back into whatever lifestyle he had, and that then he might ruminate and begin to think, well, hell, I need to square this with another guy and keep this thing going. So I wouldn't rule it out totally, but the good news is we don't have to worry about that. Yeah. And thanks to and I give my final thought, very final thought. law enforcement is no better than the communities we serve. We need their help. And this is a perfect example of how the community came forward, dimed this guy out, and allowed law enforcement to move in and do the job they're doing, lock in the case, work the evidence, put it all together. So it's always a communal relationship that's going to keep the best way to keep all of us safe.
Yeah.
So.
This is what it should be about. And believe it or not, I'm going to take heat and hate for this, but it should be about remembering Brian Thompson, a father of two, a son still in high school, a son out of high school. I appreciate the guests coming on. It is not a tagline. It is our reality, the best guests in true crime. We're also doing a lot of breaking news. We're trying to bring you a second channel. How much more breaking news I can do, I don't know, but we live in a twisted world and there's too much of it lately. But we're coming back at 7 o'clock to discuss the Alexander brothers. Very interesting case. 3 very privileged brothers here in the Miami area arrested in Miami today. But they had a real estate empire up in New York and here. Their father, a very, very wealthy guy. Appreciate everybody being here. I'll see you in 25 minutes. Love you, America. Love you, Florida. Love you, New Jersey. Love you, Virginia, where Gregg is. And it is always an honor to have all guests, but especially Agent McCrary on. See you guys at 7 o'clock.
Okay.